Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And today we've seen The Holdovers.
Yes.
I've been really looking forward to this. Directed by Alexander Payne. From the trailer, I mean, because I haven't really gone on with the two Alexander Payne films that I've seen before, Downsizing, which we did on the podcast.
Yes.
And Sideways, which was extremely popular, but I've never liked. He's done lots of other films though, which I haven't seen. The Descendants, Nebraska, About
Election.
Schmidt. So what's your kind of history with Alexander Payne films?
Well, I loved Election and I love Nebraska. I haven't seen Sideways. It's one of those films that I meant to see. I think I have the DVD of it, but for some reason I never got around to it.
Yeah.
So I don't know about that one, but actually I was surprised looking at the filmography at how much I like his films, because he's not really a director that has registered much with me. Yeah.
Sure. No, I get that. So the trailer for this I thought was terrific because it had it was like Grindhouse, right? When Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez were doing Grindhouse, it was all about adopting that 70s Grindhouse aesthetic, right? It was in the way the film looked and the way it had been treated and so on. And the trailer for this had the feeling of it's that 70s comedy look.
Yes.
Like, it was all over the trailer. The way the titles came up on screen, they kind of shake slightly because of optical printing, the way that looked, whereas in the digital age it's all pixel perfect, but it wasn't back in the days of film and so on. It had a voiceover guy. Trailers haven't had those in at least 15 years. It was like, it was really kind of old school. And I thought, how is this going to carry through to the film itself? But, it was very convincing in the trailer and very charming, I thought. And it really does carry through to the film in a big way.
Well, I mean, I liked it very much. There's something about boarding school films where, young men kind of learn how to be better people that is already like inherently musty somehow. And I did find this about this film as well, actually. It kind of felt like a heartwarming TV movie or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I liked it.
Well, that's what I didn't like about it. And I was thinking, am I being mean? Because, kind of not everything has to be visually dazzling. And, those shots of the snow and of the school. And, I mean, they were very effective, in creating a mood and some, So, I was thinking, why am I finding it a problem since it seems to be working? Right?
I loved it, right? I loved it completely throughout. And I do understand your reticence with the look. But I think everything was so appropriate to the way it should look. I was thinking, we've seen a lot of good films recently. Just the other day, we saw The Zone of Interest. We've seen Priscilla. We've seen Next Goal Wins. We've seen Ferrari. We've seen a lot of films that are good in lots of different ways. I haven't seen a film for a very long time that has the kind of ambience that this film has. It communicates such a feeling, a tone that I can't quite. But it's organic somehow, and it's in the way the characters relate to each other, and the way they look at each other, and the way they grow together. And the film is one cliche after another. It's so of its genre.
Yes.
But it works its way into me so deeply. So by the time you get to, we'll maybe get into spoiler territory in a bit. But by the time you get to, some of the kind of, because everyone's got their secrets and those things come out and people reveal their insecurities and their foibles, I found it really moving. And the characters would relate to each other in just kind of humane ways. Because the film essentially starts off with, so the premise is, you got these kids at a New England boarding school who have got nowhere to go over Christmas for various reasons. They've been kept there. They're the holdovers. You've got the teacher, played by Paul Giamatti, who is the one who is stuck with having to look after them, and he's not happy about it, and everyone's kind of at odds. And during the course of the film, as you might expect, that kind of iciness falls away and people bond.
Yeah, it's a total cliche.
Absolutely. But that bonding, when it happened and when that thawing happened, I was so moved by it, really.
I was moved. I mean, I don't want to kind of downplay that, right?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I think it's, in a way, it's a complicated film to talk about because, there are things that I really dislike about it, right? Like, that drony guitar music of you can cry, but you can laugh. And I was like, ugh.
Which bit that is? Is it
The
just
whole is a song that recurs.
Right.
Yeah, like kind of, throughout, with the guy singing that folksy thing on the guitar. Yeah.
I honestly don't remember that. I remember this. I remember the soundtrack being dominated by piano. I don't know about guitar, but I'm sure you're right.
I associate it with guitar and kind of folk music of the period, but my God, kind of lyrically, it was just so awful. But again, it works in the film. It really sets, the period. But actually, I'm surprised you don't remember it, and maybe I'm describing it badly because it's the song that recurs and recurs and recurs. It's at the opening, it's at the closing credits. Yeah, it's kind of
honestly, it must have just completely passed me by because I don't. But I'm sure you're right. I cannot think of what you're talking about.
Well, it kind of irked me.
Yeah.
Though I did like, much of the other use of music in the song, and particularly that Artie Shaw moment at Christmas that I thought was wonderful. I also think that the film is kind of ideologically very suspect. It really is one of those films. Oh, these rich people have feelings too, and they suffer as well, and etc. So kind of it's part of the reason why I don't like the genre. That said, I laughed out loud so many times. Right?
Yeah,
it is very funny, and it is kind of touching. I was also moved, but it's one of those ways that your brain processes it. So, kind of I'm moved, and at the same time I'm thinking, oh, this is such a cliche, right? Like, it was operating that way on me. On the other hand, I was surprised when we came out of the cinema, that it was over 2 hours, and actually I didn't feel the time hanging at all, which is a real compliment to the film because it's a very, very old-fashioned film. It's actually one we rarely get to see anymore. It's about people. It's small scale. It's about character and character development. It's a period piece, but actually the period, which I suppose is worth asking, kind of why did they set it in that period? I mean, I suppose it could just not really. No, it couldn't have been set now because, of course, phones and the internet would have changed the whole.
I think that's probably part of it. I think also the writer was kind of basing it. The writer is not Alexander Payne. The writer, I think, based it on experiences of his own at boarding school and in his childhood. So I'm imagining the period is similar, and that's kind of naturally where it evolves from. But that doesn't mean you can't change the period, of course.
No, but I think maybe the period. I was thinking maybe the period is significant because it's set in 1970, going into 1971, which is the period of Nixon, and the escalation of the Vietnam War, but it is also a time between the moon landing and Watergate. So there's still a sense of, I don't know, optimism in America, or kind of, it's kind of top of the world and living up to particular ideals, and I wonder if some of the school ethos and so on wasn't tied to a kind of a nostalgia for a moment where it wasn't ridiculous to believe in the ethos of, what is it, St. Bart's, or what was the school called?
The school's the Barton Academy.
So maybe the setting is used so that the ethos of the Barton Academy is still something that one could say without laughing in the era of Trump, basically.
Well, it's definitely the case that the school setting, and I think the era has to do with this, is in that kind of middle space where these things are, like the traditionalism and the mottos and so on, are kind of not being taken so seriously, or there's a struggle to take them seriously by the powers that be, the establishment. The kids certainly aren't that interested, but I suppose probably kids in the 1700s probably weren't that interested. Whenever were they? They're kids. But there's definitely a struggle by the Paul Giamatti character to keep that up, even against his own headmaster, who, as he says, he used to teach, so it's like the headmaster is of a generation where this is mattering less, because the headmaster is of a generation, I guess, where the amount of money coming in from legacy students, and that's why he's being punished, because he hasn't been... so the Paul Giamatti character has given bad grades to the son of a legacy student, and and it's like a senator, this guy, wealthy donor, but his son is now not going to get into Cornell because he got this D or whatever, D minus, and so that's why he's having to look after the kids. He's being punished for that. But the thing is, it's like the point I'm getting at is for what's most important is the money that comes in from the donor, whereas what's most important for Paul Giamatti's character, Hunnam, his name is Paul Hunnam, is give the kid the correct grade, work hard for your grade, earn it, and of course that's... but then I suppose, is that generational? Like, maybe that is... I mean, hasn't that just always been the way? That these places are institutions for the powerful, for the rich to consolidate and maintain their power and wealth by having things like legacy students and wealthy donors, and so maybe it's not that. Maybe it's not a new thing in the 70s. Maybe it's
Well, I mean, I was just trying to think why set it in the 70s, right?
Yeah.
And speculating on the precise dates, because the film is very precise, right? It's 1970, and then we have New Year's Eve going into 1971.
Mm-hmm.
So I wondered if there was something more to it than that, and I suspect there is, because you don't go to the expense of making a period film unless you have to.
No, sure. And it makes use of its period. So it's not to say that it's not got a point. It makes use of its period, certainly in racial terms. You've got an allusion to civil rights, essentially, where so the main characters in the film, you've got Paul Giamatti's Paul Hunnam, who's the teacher. You've got Dominic Sessa, who's the main kid staying over. And you've got Davine Joy Randolph as Mary Lamb, who is the administrator of the cafeteria. She's black. And her son had gone to the school. And the reason she works there is so that her son would get that first-class education there. But he couldn't escape the draft.
Because he couldn't afford college.
Yeah, and didn't make it to the age of 20. But there's also the thing where the dickhead student, I can't remember his name, but the one who's a real arsehole. And she says as much as well. Everyone agrees that he's an arsehole. Says, her cooking's so bad, but it doesn't matter anymore because they can't even fire her.
Yeah.
Which, to me, that's a fairly clear allusion to civil rights and that he's a racist little shithead.
Well, there's no question that he's a racist little shithead, but I think it has to do with more than that. They can't fire her because her son died. Yeah, that's...
Oh yeah, that's what I didn't even think about it that way. I mean, that might well be true. I took it as...
It's not because she's black.
I took it as him saying, like, if they fired her now, she would kick up a fuss about firing her because she's black. Like, he kind of imagined,
In fact, now that I think about it, the period is very important, and there is kind of, an allusion to civil rights, because we're shown all those tombstones at church of Barton boys who died in World War I and World War II, in the Korean War. And then we're told that the only Barton boy who's died in Vietnam has been this young black boy who couldn't afford college. Yeah, who is the son of
Mary.
So it's definitely racialized, right? Because, World War I, World War II, the Korean War, there's lots of, you're not shown lots and lots of names, but the implication is that many Barton boys died and did their bit for their country in those wars. Whereas in the Vietnam War, this was the unlucky sucker who had no option but to go and get killed. So, and he's black. So yes, now that I think of it, that is crystal clear.
Yeah. Well, there's also a thing where, those guys who died in the previous wars also didn't escape going to war. And of course, the most we see of them is just these dates.
But that's making a difference between the kind of wars those were,
yes,
and the kind of war that Vietnam is, and the kinds of, students that went to Barton's in those times, and the kinds of students who are going now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I was also just thinking of it in terms of, like, the film is setting up a continuity of those students when it shows you that sequence of shots that ends with Mary's son.
Well, it's setting up a continuity, but then you're told he's the only Barton student who's died in Vietnam.
Yeah.
So.
Yes. But how many? Well, maybe we should get too specific about this. But how many students do we see names of before that? I think it's maybe 3. And are they all different wars? Are we basically showing one per war?
I don't think so. I think you're shown more than one.
Right.
You're definitely shown more than one World War One.
Yeah, I think so.
So, but the implication is that, all Barton students did their bit in the war, and it's clear that not all Barton students are doing their bit in Vietnam.
I get. I'm with you there. I mean, there's definitely a difference. Like when you also think about it in British terms, it's all that for king and country thing, and like you were doing the right thing by sending your sons to war.
Yes,
there was honour in that and so on. Whereas they've just said the other day they want to bring back conscription to fight Russia, and everyone is saying no, it's okay, not for me, thanks. Like there's no king and country anymore.
Well, the film is basically saying it's only the poor, and the black kids and the poor black kids who have no choice but to go, and kind of the rest. If you have money and wealth and position, you get off scot-free. So basically, kind of, you're just being exploited, and you're a sucker if you go. I mean, the sucker element I'm adding, the film doesn't imply that, because obviously it's seen as tragic. But, the fact that he got to go because he was poor and black is crystal clear.
Let's talk about the fact that the main character, who I see as the main character, although it's kind of an ensemble, or at least a two-hander between Paul Giamatti and Dominic Sessa. But I would say Paul Giamatti is the centre of the film.
He is, but it is a real two-hander, though, he is... he's so great in it. I was...
Well, I was going to say, let's talk about the fact that he's basically you.
How very dare you.
In some ways. Yeah, well, at one point you leaned over to me and you said, he's me. And it's when he was going on and on in like a cynical rant about the state of the world. And it's supposed to be Christmas. He's at a party. And he's talking about how dreadful the world is. And this, that, and the other. And
I identified with that because... I am thinking, am I becoming like this grumpy old man? When you said the other day, becoming? Like the implication is that I already am. But this sense that he's got this very bleak view of the world, that kind of, things are getting worse, and he's not shy about articulating the various ways in which things are wrong. So, and I do recognize myself in that in a negative way. Yeah, it's not a quality because... everybody knows that what the problems of the world are. Kind of, there's no reason to be kind of constantly reminded. So I did identify with that aspect of, his personality. And others, actually, but obviously kind of not in many other ways. Yeah.
No, I mean, he's got a devotion to the academic, which for him borders on... For him, it's really the only thing... so I mean, a key difference between you and him is that you travel.
Yes.
And he's been there for his entire life, basically. And we do get this revelation later on of what has kept him there to some extent.
Yes.
This thing about being kicked out of Harvard he's framed for plagiarism by a rich legacy student who actually plagiarised from him. So that ruined his career prospects, and a relationship with the teacher at Barton, which was his high school, gave him a job there. So there's like a kind of concrete reason. But there's also this thing about he would like to travel, and there's nothing really stopping him, but he hasn't.
Well, except there are things stopping him. So you learn later on that basically because he doesn't have a university degree, he's not getting paid a full salary. He's just an adjunct, right? So he's obviously, on a much lower salary than his colleagues. So maybe he can't afford to go. You also see that he drives a very old car, he's not someone who's got a lot of money. So kind of maybe money is an issue. The traveling, I understand. What I don't understand is the way that... And I'm not sure if this is like, if it's a problem in the film, actually, because, you could have made him an old guy who's not in a relationship and so on without making him smell and, kind of the implication is that he is afraid of sex and he's afraid of women, and the student suspects he's a virgin. I mean, I think that's kind of taking it too far, really. I don't think there's a need for that. It's over-egging the pudding, really.
I know what you mean. I don't quite see what we're supposed to get out of that.
I mean, he could be irascible. He could have, and things that that I identify with. I mean, I'm not the most socially skilled person. He's not. He offends people without. Well, he's often very deliberate about the way that he offends people, but he's a very nice and sensitive man, and so on. You could have made the character equally rich without, giving him a body odor problem, really. And the sex bit, I'm not sure how to read that, because he says, "Oh, you should have seen me when I was younger," and really, is the implication there that is true, or that he's just
saying something to the kid to get out of the awkward situation, or whatever.
He's somebody who's looking at porn in class, so he doesn't lack for desire, right? So why is it that everybody is saying that he's got a problem, just that he's afraid of women? And again, I do find that over-egging the pudding. I come from a small village in Spain, and I know everyone, and kind of like Miss Marple, you do think that you have an insight into human behavior because one sees everything in a village. A village has all types, and it certainly has a lot of unmarried elderly people, not all of whom are gay, right? So there are many reasons why people don't marry or people don't have relationships, and kind of people have various problems interacting with other people and so on. That could be understandable without kind of, taking it to such an extent as here. I do think it's unnecessary to give the man, a physical problem with body odor.
Yeah.
He could just be awkward, or he could have had a bad experience in his past, or, whatever. Like, there's so many reasons why one could be uncomfortable, right?
I agree with you. Although I think I liked his funny eyes. I think they work really well, and I would have been sad to lose those. You could definitely, you can build in just a guy who is awkward and maybe that kind of thing, without having to go into, I have this medical condition that means I don't process trimethylene, whatever it was,
yes,
and I smell like fish by the end of the day. That doesn't have to be the reason that people have kind of stayed away from him.
Yeah,
it could just be like he's kind of awkward and so on.
He's awkward and he doesn't make people feel good. I completely get it, right? Like, kind of, nobody wants to be around someone who's constantly making you feel bad about whatever your faults are, however true they are.
He's kind of trying to build stuff onto to an absurd degree, I guess. And I think you're supposed to find it funny, I suppose. And maybe sympathetic, but I didn't. I just found it was a little bit confusing, and as you said, a little bit too much.
He is very funny, and what I began to say originally in praise is that I think it's such a great performance, and I was thinking of this moment, at the end where he gets visibly moved, and the difference in the performance of the younger man and him is, the young man is very good, and he's handling his scenes well. But Giametti's response is his whole body flushes. Like, it's like his face reddens, with emotion, right? When they say goodbye, right? And then, of course, they don't, initially they don't hug, they don't do anything, but it's just the changes in his face, I thought were like, kind of communicated everything. It was like extraordinary. And it was like a physical change. It was like, you felt him kind of getting red or something. It was just like really wonderful.
It's a really remarkable performance. He's such an incredible presence on screen, Giamatti, and he has been forever. And it's the kind of role that he really deserves, and he absolutely shines in it. He's so. I was sort of thinking at one point, I thought, there's something so original about this, and of course, really, there's nothing original about this character. Every part of it is is a cliche you've seen somewhere before, down to the things of, this guy is apparently no good with women, possibly a virgin, scared of them, the body odor that kept him away, he receded into academia, all that sort of thing. I feel like, you've seen all these cliches, all these character aspects, places here, there, and everywhere. So there's not an original thing about it, but it's played so sincerely and richly. It's not played as though it's a collection of bits. It's played as he's a full character with a history and and a personality and everything. I don't know. I'm not explaining it well, but I understood him implicitly, and I got him, and I was so into it from the start. I get this guy, and you could even maybe say it's slightly over-egged at the start. The thing about what a kind of a strict guy he is, so that he will be softened later on.
Of course,
you could even say that, but I think that's part of the territory, right? That's what this film is.
I mean, I do think that the film is very effective with all of that, and that it gets all the gradations and changes in mood and, incredibly well, including the boy, the awakening sexuality. I mean, those scenes at the party when he meets the young girl and they're doing the finger painting, like, you got a real sense of just sensuality. Yeah, the camera moves in, it gets very close. It's really beautifully done, actually.
It really captured that feeling of being like 15, 16 and like, oh my God, there's a girl. And like you get close and the possibility that like for the first time in your life, oh my God, I might get close. It fucking captured that completely. I was amazed. And it also captured in the same scene, although to a lesser extent, that feeling of like finding out that your teachers are human, which is going on throughout the film. But seeing them in a party context,
for me, the moment that I liked best is the moment in the hotel room where Giametti realizes that, he realizes the student is taking Librium because he's depressed. Yeah, and then you see him go into his own bag and pop some Librium himself, right?
Yeah.
So the kind of depression is one of the things they share.
Yeah, absolutely. I was reminded of when I went on a ski trip, funnily enough, because, a ski trip kind of figures into this film. But my school would put on a ski trip every year, and I went when I must have been in the upper sixth, I must have been 17. And we went to Zermatt. And there were 4 of us in the upper sixth who went, and the rest were kids from lower years. And I remember one of the teachers one day getting absolutely fucking furious with some kid in the lower year. So the 4 of us from the upper sixth were just sat like in the kind of lobby of this hotel, like playing cards, and the teacher was losing his shit for whatever reason. And we were just sitting there like very embarrassed, like, when you hear someone else going off and you're like, I'm fucking moving here, And that was going on for about half an hour. And then the shouting stops and he comes out and it's like 7, 8 in the evening. And he comes out and he sees us and he goes, do you want to come for a pint? But it's like all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, is this a trick? And before you know it, you're sat in a pub with your teacher sharing a pint, and it's very weird, like you're seeing them in a context that you're just not used to, and you're being treated like adults, and there's a feeling of that here, right? When he's like, he's the kid, he's just like he's going to his teacher's party, and he's seeing them in a different context. It reminded me of that. It was a very weird evening. I think one thing I maybe wanted a little bit more of from the film was Mary, who I think is a really wonderful character, and she is from the start. She's kind of the heart of the film, because we begin with her having lost her son, and she's having to deal with that Christmas as well as deal with hanging out at school, dealing with the holdovers and so on, and she's still doing the job of cooking for everyone. And I do like I like the early scenes that she has with Paul, where when they watch telly together, she introduces him to the concept of popular television, and they have a chat about her son, history, and that kind of thing. I think that's. I mean, every individual scene in the film, not just with her, but with every individual scene, it flows so beautifully. No matter what it's about, it has a beginning, middle, and end, and and they're witty and they move quickly. And even though you get into some quite serious and dramatic territory with them, there's a lightness that is maintained. You know,
Yeah.
I really love it. I think it's incredibly directed, actually. But I feel like with her character, I don't know, maybe it's unfair because you do get a lot of context about her and her son and her son's father, who she never got to marry because he died too soon. Was there something just a little bit missing, or maybe slightly too quickly developed when you see her crying when she's had one too many to drink in the kitchen at the party, and all of a sudden it comes out how distraught she is at her son's death.
Again, this is interesting because it's the problem with the film for me, because on the one hand the character is fully fleshed out. You get so much background and context. You have the Paul Giamatti character kind of making a tentative pass at her where she knocks his hand back. You see her relationship with this janitor, which is there's an unfolding there of something. You see her with her family, so kind of this is much more fleshed out than this type of character would be in this type
and although
of film.
we've described the film as a two-hander between the two guys, we see more of her family and life than we do of theirs, really. We hear them talk about their lives, but we see hers.
Yeah, exactly. On the other hand, the character feels only a step removed from, an Eve Ardenish kind of waspish, funny, cigarette dangling, but with a heart of gold. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and this is something that's fascinating to me about the film, that on the one hand, it feels really well born. On the other hand, the film is making it live, So, and I suppose what's true of that character is true of the film as a whole.
Yeah. I mean, that's ultimately where I am with the film, is just I live in the cliche and I love it. And the fact that it feels so, as you said, TV movie-ish, like Hallmark movie-ish, in some ways set at Christmas after all. Yes. And everyone, everyone has a happy ending. It's not exactly true. The ending is kind of complex, but you have this ending where the characters change.
But it's a happy ending.
Yeah, the characters change, and one character does something for another character and is himself satisfied with the outcome. So Paul loses his job in having covered for Angus, but we see him celebrating that loss.
Well, also, it's maybe the push he needed to now write the book and and
monograph.
So on.
He's not got a book in it.
That's right. It's just merely a monograph.
So but it's all of that. It's all that cliche, and it's very comfortable, but I lived in its world.
It's very interesting because there was this LA Review of Books article, and it ranks all the top 10 Oscar nominees, and the top is Zone of Interest, I think, followed by Oppenheimer, and near the bottom is The Holdovers. And to me it kind of makes sense. That kind of it's a really good film. It's really enjoyable. It's very touching, but there is just something about it that doesn't soar for me.
See, I in a way, I kind of think about it from the other direction. So I kind of start off by thinking about what a bunch of cliches and everything it is strung together, and then there's alchemy in it that makes it come alive and elevates it to something that I wouldn't ordinarily be as interested in. I'm kind of thinking about it in that direction.
You are, and my way of thinking about it is I'm comparing it to other films that are kind of like this, that they're small scale about relationships, and and you think of the very greatest, like I think like Leo McCarey's Make Way for Tomorrow, which is like a little bit like Tokyo Story. It's about this old couple, who've waited too long with their mortgage arrears or whatever, and they get kicked out, and they have to go to old folks' home, but they have to be separated, and it's their last weekend in New York. And anyway, the film is full of scenes that I just find it so moving, and it's like magical. And I just think, as much as I like this film, and I was touched by it, and I did find it very funny, to me it didn't soar in the way that, like, the greatest of these films do. So,
yeah,
I think it's a very good film, but I wouldn't kind of put it up there either.
Yeah. Well, maybe not. I do really love it, and I thought it's actually a really remarkable achievement to just make me feel as much as this did.
Yes, I do think that it is also kind of a remarkable achievement, because to have a situation that feels very cliche-ish, but to make each moment live and seem true, and is really quite an achievement, I think.
Yeah, and I also want to say how much I liked the kid, Dominic Sessa, who plays Angus, who we've talked over a little bit, but there's that close up of his face. The camera actually over a while zooms out of his face just after he's visited his dad in the mental institution, and he's opening up about the fear that he will be like his dad and missing him and so on. And it's a long take, and he's got a lot of dialogue to deliver at that point, and it's so intense on his face, and he's so emotionally open, kind of for the camera. I thought, God, this is really remarkable. Like, he's an attractive kid. He has the right look for the period. He has the right look for it. I don't know how old the actor is, but he looks, like a 17-year-old kid and what have you. And he has the right kind of attitude, fighting against the teacher. And, there's a great scene where he's chasing him around the horse. It feels so right. But then when it comes to the most challenging parts of what that role has, he's up to it.
Yeah.
And he's half of what makes that so moving. The other half is the actor he's playing against.
I mean, it's a character piece, so each of the characters has to work, and it's a triumvirate. It's really the three of them, and they make it work, really.
Yeah.
But Paul Giamatti is in a class of his own, I think.
He's remarkable. I saw an interview with him just recently, because he's been obviously interviewing a lot because he's promoting the film, and he's on the awards. I mean, he just won the Golden Globe, didn't he? I think he won the Golden Globe, and so did Davine Joy Randolph, and they're also both nominated in their respective supporting categories at the Oscars. And he was talking about previous roles that he's done, and he was, like, it's so clear that the role that he enjoyed the most was as the orangutan in Planet of the Apes. He loved it, and it feels so Paul Giamatti, because he's talking about how he was offered it, or he went for it. And his agent said, "Would you not rather play a human?" And he's like, "If you tell them I want to play a human, I'm firing you on the spot. Like, I have to play the monkey." You can see why that kind of appeals, and you can see why this guy, with his kind of idiosyncrasies and the eye thing in particular, and the way he behaves, is appealing to him, and he really brings it alive. Yeah.
Anyway, it's a film that I, on balance, really liked very much. I also think it's a film worth seeing on a big screen if you can. Even though I was saying that it's not visually spectacular, there is something about being immersed in those faces and those situations, and not having control over the time of the film, that kind of makes it really, really effective in a cinema.
Yeah, you'll get so absorbed.
Yeah,
I was fantastic.
I was as well. So, do you want to add anything before we wrap up?
No.
Okay, well, on that note, we highly recommend it. Thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Audible, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies, and Blue Sky, eavesdropping.bsky.social, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.